Hi guys, I'm Ed.
Hi, I'm Hugh, and welcome back to Tone Twins TV. We've had a really long break. I think it's just about a year since our last video came out on the Rickenbacker conversion, and we've both had pretty hectic years in 2022.
It's been a very busy time. You've been sorting out a new workshop?
Yeah, basically the work's gone on for about a year, but I've now got a proper lutherie workshop and an electronics workshop in the house, which has been great, but the building work just dragged on. And I guess the other big bit of news for me is that I left guitar after 20 odd years, and I'm now writing for Guitarist magazine, so very happy to be doing so as well.
Which is great. And I've been sorting out my studio at home, working on a bunch of projects and family commitments as well. And before we know it, a year's gone by.
Yeah.
But we're still talking.
So. We are. We haven't stopped talking.
Good.
In fact, we had a really interesting project at the end of last summer when Cardinal Black asked us to go up to our cappella studio and do a one mic recording. So Ed and I did that together, and it was a bit frantic, but we were really pleased with it.
Came out really well, and as to when you see this video, there may well be more sessions out there as well.
Fingers crossed. Yeah,
booked to do some more recording with them, which is great.
Yeah, really excited about that.
So we thought we'd come back with a little minor, insignificant amp of the Fender era for a new episode.
The legendary, the revered Fender Vibroverb.
Absolutely.
So this is Ed's amp, and he's had it a while now, and I know he absolutely loves the thing. So the unusual thing about it, because most people associate this amp with Stevie Ray Vaughan and his black panel later versions, but this is the first incarnation of the Vibroverb, and it's got quite an interesting history to it, and I think Ed's been genning up a little bit on that.
Yeah, so these were a really short run that Fender did in sort of 1963, early spring 1963. Various different numbers out there, but between 300 and 500 were made.
Super rare then.
Super rare.
Yeah.
And this was a real transitional time for Fender. As we know, lots of the instruments were changing from the sort of end of the tweed era in the late 50s to the blondes and brown era that was just for a few short years from sort of 1960, 61 to 63-ish. Amps were evolving massively. The demands from players for more volume and different tones, and ultimately led to all sorts of experiments over at Fender HQ as such, one of which was the Vibroverb amp, which is notorious in Fender amp circles for being the first Fender amp to feature Fender spring reverb.
It's pretty significant because, as I understand it, Fender brought out a standalone reverb unit in 1961. So, yeah, the first amp with built-in reverb produced by the Fender
Absolutely.
company.
And they weren't the first to do it. Other companies, Ampeg and a few other companies, had released combo amps with reverb. But as I'm sure we can all attest to today, the amount of Fender combos or certainly similar amps with built-in spring reverb, and it all starts from here.
It's really, it became almost emblematic for Fender, didn't it? That's that kind of clean Fender tone with lashings of spring reverb. It's when people talk Fender amps, people, maybe not so much these days, but certainly back in the day, that's the sound that sprung to mind. No pun intended.
Absolutely.
When you talk about Fender amps.
But yeah, so in 63, a few of these were made. It's a roughly 35 watt amp, two 6L6s. Twin channels marked normal and bright, so you've got a slightly brighter channel, which in the later amps would evolve into the bright switches, but effectively that's the difference.
So the bright channel on this is just effectively has the bright switch engaged, that virtual bright switch.
That's exactly it, and that's the only key differences between the two channels. What's nice about these amps is that the reverb and the tremolo, which deserves a special mention because it's output bias tremolo, which, as I'm sure you know, operates on the power tubes and sort of switching them on and off effectively.
Well, yeah, it varies the bias, so it adjusts the amount of output that they produce, so you get a volume fluctuation.
Absolutely, and is a glorious, rich musical tremolo, which harks back to the tremolos in the Tweed amps, Tweed Tremolux and Vibrolux and things like that.
But again, you know, you've used the word tremolo because it is tremolo.
Exactly.
But this is a vibroverb, and vibrato, as you know from finger vibrato, actually refers to a fluctuation in pitch. So it's always been a misnomer on Fender amps.
So yeah, back to this amp, a 2x10 combo, 2 Oxford 10K 6 speakers inside, I believe.
Has this got the original speakers in it?
Yes, original speakers in here.
Wow.
And one of the key things, which it's obviously the first Fender amp with 2 effects involved, so the output bias tremolo and the reverb, and it's a special thing round the back, which looks no big deal today as such, and we'll do a close-up. But of course, being the first Fender amp with 2 effects required a 2-button foot switch.
And it's brown.
And it's brown, of course, which you wouldn't see for very long. But a fascinating little sort of information about the influence of this amp on future.
And it's the first time it was seen.
Absolutely. Most of you may well be aware of a different Vibroverb, which is the 64 black panel Vibroverb. Which is synonymous mostly with Stevie Ray Vaughan as one of his huge amps, and therefore has since become very popular.
And very valuable.
Very valuable indeed.
Sought after.
Indeed. This is much more in the sort of warm ZZ Top type tones, but with a reverb, and quite a dark sounding reverb as well. But it does one very cool thing, which is as the amp is overdriving, you've got it turned up loud, that output bias tremolo comes in after a chord, because those output valves can't do both jobs, so they're pushing this lovely big rich distorted guitar sound, and as the sound is dying away, it's almost as if the tremolo kicks in more and more intensity to the end of notes, which is such a musically addictive and lovely sound.
But the circuit of this is quite different to the later black panel ones, and there are significant differences. I mean, most obvious is they went from 2 10-inch speakers to a single 15-inch speaker. They also did the kind of typical thing that Fender did throughout the 1960s as the amps were evolving. I guess they were shooting for cleaner tones, more high headroom, and kind of a stiffer power supply. So it went from, I believe, 5 16 microfarad filter caps in this one to 5 20 microfarads. The tremolo, vibrato tremolo changed, so this one is a pure valve tremolo, but in the black panel ones they started using the opto resistor, so it's like a photosensitive resistor, so it's closer to the kind of thing they were using in things like the deluxe reverb and amps like that. So it's got a different feel and a different kind of characteristic to it.
Absolutely.
They messed with the negative feedback, so this amp here has a lot less negative feedback compared to the later ones. And they also did some other interesting stuff, which is kind of indicative of the fact that Fender were trying to kind of feel their way through the design of this amplifier. And since it was the first on-board spring reverb, they actually used a 12AX7 tube as a reverb driver, and they also used a 12AX7 in the phase inverter. It's a long tail phase inverter. Both are absolutely fine, but I think Fender realised that as a reverb driver the 12AX7 wasn't particularly effective, or it wasn't as good as it could be, and they quickly changed to the AT7 valve in the black panel, and they also used a 12AT7 for the phase inverter.
I think on the black panel as well, as with most of the black panel era amps, the vibrato, tremolo and reverb is kind of mainly on the second channel. Whereas on these amps it's universal to both channels, which is an interesting little thing.
Well, we've been banging on about the differences between the brown panel and the black panel Vibroverb models, and obviously there's a glaring great big hole in the middle of the set, because We don't currently have a black panel Vibroverb to compare with it. But the good news is we know someone who does. So very shortly we're about to be joined by the great Aynsley Lister, who's travelling down with his 1964 Vibroverb, and we're going to have a little bit of a shootout between the two amps.
Left a space for me. Look at that. Fantastic.
Amazing.
Oh,
Hello, mate.
hello, mate. How are you?
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Aynsley Lister.
Hello.
So tell us about this amp.
Right then. So I've had this for about 10 years. I picked it up off eBay, I think, because when I was about 16, I watched the Stevie Ray at the El Macombo concert. And of course, yeah, he sounded amazing, didn't he? And
So you would make you sound exactly like Stevie Ray.
well, yeah, it's a Vibroverb. They're really rare. I went down to pick it up. This guy was selling it, and plugged in. Didn't sound quite as I expected, because in my head I thought I'm going to go down with my Strat, and I'm going to plug in, and I'm going to be Texas Flood and all that. I thought that's the missing link, and it didn't sound quite as I expected. But I thought probably just needs a good service. So we agreed on the price. He was very, very fair, and I took it home. Kept plugging into it. No, it's still not right. It's very, very bright sounding. I thought, nah, there's something not right with this. And I tinkered around with it and tried different settings, different guitars. It came with the original, I'm going to be really technical now, the JBL D130F, which is the speaker that, when you see them on Reverb and all that
It's
sort
the
of
one
thing.
everyone wants.
Yeah, it's got the original, whatever. I think at the time it was an upgrade. You could have, the standard one was a CTS, I think, or maybe a Jensen, and the expensive one, if you had the extra cash, was the JBL. But apparently they're quite bright sounding. So I tried, because I saw this on the internet, tried running just the amp into a speaker cab I knew, and suddenly I was like, oh, right, okay, yeah, got to change that speaker.
Yeah.
You tried finding a selection of 15-inch speakers. There's not that many available.
Yeah.
And so I tried a few over the years, and I settled with a WGS Alnico thing, which I've had in there for most of the time.
How does that change the sound then?
It's more forgiving. It's not as brutal and in your face. I think the JBL, it's just very bright, quite piercing, which is, it's well documented. Especially with a Strat or bright guitar, you turn the amp up and everything, it just gets brighter and louder, which is certainly for me definitely not a good thing. I think I've got bright hands. When I play, everything's quite bright, so this was just accentuating, basically making me sound more like me and less like Stevie Ray Vaughan. So I tried a different speaker, and then I learned to love the amp, but not for the reasons that I thought I would have done. I bought this because I wanted to, I wanted to be Stevie Ray Vaughan.
So have you used this on albums? Have you recorded with it?
Yeah, I've used it on the last 3 albums. Mm-hmm. The most recent album, which came out just before Christmas, which is called Along for the Ride, I used it a lot on that. So again, I suppose a lot of people associate this amp with, that kind of, Strat neck pickup kind of tone or whatever. When I use it, I don't sound like Steve Ray. I sound like me, whatever You know, it's a blessing and a curse. You know, like it's taken me years to realise that whatever you use, you still sound like you. When I use this, I tend to use it probably in a different way to what a lot of people expect. So on the new album, I used it on a track with a 335 going into it and the amp flat out. And you probably wouldn't expect it to be a vibroverb when you hear that sound. It sounds more like Angus Young.
What's the name of that track?
It's called World is Falling.
Okay, cool. So that's a good example of that more gnarly, punchy, rocky sound that they're capable of, which people don't expect to come out of a black panel Fender.
I think that's the thing, you know, I think these amps are associated with that kind of bluesy, slightly on the edge sound, but they can do so much more than that, you know, you just got to, you know, just try it really. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay, well look, I think that's a really good juncture for us to pause and actually compare these two amps and hear what they actually sound like.
Awesome.
Did you bring a guitar?
Yeah. Well, I thought, you know, when you said, can you bring the amp? You know, I thought, well, you're going to want me to, like, plug something in. So,
yeah.
I mean, I could use one of yours. You've got some guitars. So.
Well, we did your mate race.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, let's take a listen.
Superb.
thanks, Ains. We really enjoyed that playing. So, I think in some ways the amps kind of defied our expectations a little bit. Certainly, I think the speaker in here, you've had a little bit of a rethink about that.
It's complete. To be honest, today for me has been quite an interesting day because I thought I knew this amp, and it's got this JBL back in it, which I thought I hated. Today, for some reason, I don't know if it's this room or something, I don't know, but I've never heard it sound like this today. So when I plugged in with the JBL, which I thought I hated, I was like, I was sort of dialing it in when we started off, and I was really liking what I was hearing.
Well, I mean, when you first started playing clean, my first feeling was, geez, this amp sounds so pretty. The top end just sounds really beautiful. I'm not hearing what Ains has been talking about here.
The one thing I've never played that Strat into this amp before. So that is maybe a thing that maybe just that Strat and this amp just marry up really well, because as anybody who plays Strats will know, they all sound different. Some are a bit more forward, some are a bit more softer in the mid-range, and sometimes you can get the right combination. And for whatever reason, the combination of that Strat and this amp today with this speaker, I really enjoyed it, and I didn't expect that to happen. I thought we'd have been very quickly, the other one that I got in the car, we'd have been sticking that back in. But no, it was a totally different experience. So.
I think we all had like a different experience of the day as well, because I've been in the control room doing the recording. Ed's been out here operating the cameras, been in the room with Ains as he's actually playing, and you're the guys who've been playing them. So we have three distinct experiences here. Well,
yeah, because how a piece of gear responds affects how you play. And I was probably saying earlier on before I started playing, essentially you're always going to sound like you through whatever gear, and that's just a realization I've come to. But if you're hearing something, how an amp responds in terms of like the difference between this one and that one, it's hugely different. This one's a lot more punchy. It's like this is probably more dynamic, whereas this one, if you suddenly dig in, this one kind of compresses more, squashes more, so it's a more compact sound overall. Whereas this, if I'm on the Strat playing softly and then I suddenly go for a big chord, it's going to jump out. I mean, you said that sat over there, didn't you?
Absolutely, there was a physical sort of thump in the chest in the room from that JBL speaker hitting that this one doesn't do, and overall today that felt a louder amp. We're using attenuators at certain times with different tones, but like you say, it seemed to have a wider dynamic range. That's not a plus or a negative, it's just a different experience.
Just totally different.
I think as well, like listening in the control room, I'm hearing a different kind of shape to the mid-range off the brown one. Yeah. It's kind of thicker, it's grungier, there's a kind of fuzzy quality to it.
It's kind of furry around the edges.
Fur. And the reverb is kind of distorted too. I like that.
And darker and grungier reverb as well, isn't
it? And
I
really like the trem as well, because you really hear that kind of pulsation in the low end. It's really kind of swampy sounding. Yeah. On the other hand, one thing that's kind of interesting is you were obviously hearing yourself better through this amp. Because we need to adjust the headphone balance to take the guitar down a little bit when you're playing through this one, because the clarity is so extreme.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the front end of the note that's the one thing that I noticed the most playing this or playing that. On that one, it's just softer overall. It's less brutal, I suppose, probably one word to use. But with this, especially on a Strat, if you scrape the pick across the string, you can hear that front end. You hear it a lot more on this, and it's got a lot more immediacy. I don't know if that's the amp or the speaker. Probably a combination of both.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
But definitely sort of glacier, this one. But it makes you go for different things, Yeah.
There was a moment, we were talking about it before, where you felt obviously a bit more comfortable with this one, and there was a certain time when you had this one cranked up, where you're playing, which was phenomenal all the way through.
It's loud.
But just went to the stratosphere. Like, it's almost like you just relaxed into it, and you just got, and it was all there, and it sounded utterly glorious. They both did, but you seemed more at home on this one.
I think, it's just that thing of I'm quite, I suppose my style of playing, especially when I'm digging in, is quite attacky. And if I go to attack a note, I want it to jump out. I don't want it to kind of just get lost, or I want to have that thing where it's that note jumps out. So I suppose, especially when they're cranked, this one has a bit more of that kind of thing. It's more punching more forward.
And you hear it in the mix when you're balancing it with the track.
Right.
It doesn't even have to be loud relative to the track to cut through.
Yeah.
You just get that kind of level of detail
Yeah.
and kind of life and clarity out of it. Which makes it really easy to mix.
They are just so different. They are, to say they've both got the same name is bizarre to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the confusion maybe is. But
And a year apart.
Yeah.
Spring 63 to late late autumn 63, these were made. By early 64, these were being made. Completely different amp, new design, different speaker, stiffer power section, different reverb. So the evolution in Fender at that time was astronomical.
Rapid.
it's
Rapid,
bonkers.
yeah.
It's bonkers.
Okay, so let's sum this up. Anybody got any preferences?
Going on today, and I'm not just saying this because I'm biased, but this one, for me, today, just because I suppose I feel like I've kind of rediscovered it. I knew it did that, especially when it's cranked. I knew it did like that kind of crunchy thing. But I think the thing that surprised me the most is this speaker, which I thought I hated. And I was about to, probably within half an hour of me arriving, I was ready to kind of, I was even saying to you, we can try the JBL, but you're probably going to hate it. It's going to sound nasty. Yeah. And then I switched it on. I was like, oh. This one, I'd take both. I love the way this has kind of got that kind of fuzzy, grungy thing about it, and I love the vibrato or tremolo, whichever you call it, on this, because it's a bit more kind of that kind of throbby thing, whereas this is a little bit kind of on and off. It's that choppy thing. I think I prefer that one. Having
played them both, this is more forgiving. All the positives about that being that explosive attack and that immediacy, which is superb under your fingers, and the tone was to die for. Tone loved that. But having played them both, the slightly more compressed, squishy character of this, the swampiness of this, ultimately they do different things, don't they? They're great at different things, and I guess both together is my answer.
If you're having a good night where you're on it, maybe this one. But if, there's definitely a few points where I went for a note and didn't quite make it, and it's very, very obvious when you're plugged into this. But I suppose just different tools for different jobs.
I usually go for brown over black, but today I preferred this one. If I could play like him, I would want this amp. But because I play like me and I need compression and I need something to obscure the kind of dodgy bits, I'm probably better off with a brown one. Anyway, that said, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you all again soon. Big thanks to Aynsley Lister, and it's goodbye from me.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Okay. Cheers.
Double.
Thank you.